This meeting is being recorded.
All right, it's just a couple minutes after 10 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and get started. I know some people are still making their way into the room, but we'll get started with the preliminaries at least. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Silva. I'm a field representative with the Board of State and Community Corrections. And I'm also assigned to the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program, or as you'll hear us call it, the JAG grant or the JAG program, because as you can hear me just try, I couldn't get it out all in one go. So we call it JAG for short. I'd like to thank you all for joining us and welcome you to this bidders conference for the 2022 JAG request for proposals. Before we get started in earnest, I'd like to acknowledge a few members of the BSCC team who are associated with or support the JAG project. We have with us today Tia Hairston, who is a data research specialist, and Tia will be talking to us a little later on about the proposal rating process, so you'll be hearing from her. We also have joining us Danielle Feist. She's a staff services manager that manages the program analysts who are assigned to some of our grants, including the JAG grant. And Danny is going to be talking to us later to give us some pointers on preparing your budget proposal. So you'll be hearing from her later as well. We also have with us Chad Norrid. He's an associate government program analyst. And along with myself, Chad will be one of the primary points of contact for those of you whose projects are ultimately funded. I'd also like to introduce Ricardo Goodridge, our deputy director who leads us in our grant administration division. He runs all of the programs that do the grants. I apologize for that. And not coincidentally, he is also my boss. And then finally, I'd like to acknowledge Linda Penner. She is the chair of the Board of State and Community Corrections, and she also serves as the chair for the Executive Steering Committee that provided guidance and direction on development of the JAG RFPs. Linda may be joining us later and may choose to say a few words, so we'll let her take the floor when that happens. Linda, if you're with us right now, by all means, please feel free to take the floor.
And she's not yet with us.
She's not yet here, so we'll wait for later on if she's able to join us. Okay, before I move on, I'd like to give you a kind of an overview of our agenda today, so you have an idea of what we'll be covering. We'll be starting with a brief overview of the BSCC as an agency. Then we'll talk a little bit about the background of the JAG grant program. We'll be reviewing some of the key components regarding the RFP that we're here to talk about today. We'll be discussing proposal rating factors in the proposal rating process. We'll be taking a few moments to talk about the actual process of submitting your proposals on our new submittable application portal. And then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways at the end of the morning's presentations. Now, before I move on, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items. We would ask that if you are not speaking, that you go ahead and mute yourself, so we try to control the background noise as best we can. I'll apologize in advance of any background noise that comes over my end, but obviously I can't be muting myself. We do ask that if you would please go ahead and enter your name and organization into the chat so we have kind of an ongoing record of who is joining us today. We have built into our presentation some pauses for questions, so we'll ask that you hold your questions until we get to those pauses just to keep the flow going okay. If you wish to use the chat function to enter your questions, one of the things you can do to help us out is type at the beginning of your question the word question in all caps. That'll help us kind of filter out the questions that we need to respond to from the general introduction and any other chat that might be going on at the time. And then the last thing is, I do recommend that you go ahead and have a copy of the instructional packet, the RFP for the JAG program, open and handy as we go through this. As you'll see in the PowerPoint, we have a couple of notations to show you what page the item we're discussing is on, so you can actually review that that language or that process in the actual instruction packet as we're talking about it. All right. As I mentioned, we'll go ahead and start with a brief overview of the Board of State and Community Corrections, so you have a sense of who we are and what we do. The board, and again, if people could mute themselves, that would help us out in controlling the background noise. Appreciate it. As I was about to mention, the BSCC reports directly to the governor's office and is organized under a board that is made up of 13 members, most of whom are appointed by the governor. And as you can see here, the BSCC provides statewide leadership, coordination, and technical assistance to promote effective state and local efforts and partnerships in California's adult and juvenile criminal justice system, including providing technical assistance and coordination to local governments related to public safety. Now, how do we do all that? We have several divisions that help us complete those missions. The first one I mentioned that administers the grants is the Corrections Planning and Grants Programs. That's the division I work for, and we administer state and federal grants, including the JAG program that we're here to talk about today. We also have the Standards and Training for Corrections that monitors and develops selection and training for local correctional professionals. The County Facilities Construction Division that administers construction financing for local detention facilities. The Facilities Standards and Operations Division that inspects local detention facilities and establishes minimum standards for operation of those facilities. And we have great administrative, legal, and research units that provide support across the entire agency. And I should probably add a qualification that those quick descriptions don't fully describe or do justice to the work that all those divisions do every day, but it's the best I can manage in the short time we have today. So moving on to the reason we're all here, I'd like to briefly give you a little background on the JAG program itself. The JAG grant program is named after Officer Edward R. Byrne, who was killed in the line of duty in 1988. He was a New York police officer. If you're interested in reading a little more about Officer Byrne, I've provided a link in the PowerPoint to a web page that provides you some more details. The grant itself is federally funded through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is part of the U.S. Department of Justice, and is the leading source of federal justice funding to state and local jurisdictions in the United States. Nationwide, the grant program, the JAG grant, is providing this fiscal year 2022 a little over $191 million to states and territories across the nation. In general, JAG grant funding may be used for the following purposes: hiring personnel and/or purchase supplies, equipment, contractual support, training, technical assistance, and information systems for criminal justice, including for one or more of the BSCC approved program purpose areas. And we'll be discussing those program purpose areas in a little more detail shortly. Now, we will be providing a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and the recording. You probably noticed when you first came in that this presentation is being recorded. You'll be able to access both the PowerPoint and the recording on our website in probably about 2 weeks. Also, we'll be providing a frequently asked questions document that we will be updating periodically as we receive and respond to questions. Speaking of questions, you may submit questions to the email link you see here before you, jag2022@bscc.ca.gov, and we'll get those responses to you as quickly as we're able to, and be including those in the FAQ document as we update it moving forward. All right, I'd like to stop and focus on a couple of key dates that you want to be aware of. This request for proposal was released on October 14th of this year. The bidders conference, obviously that's today, October 31st. And by the way, happy Halloween, everyone. I apologize for not showing up in costume. I couldn't make my mind up what to show up as other than field representative, and this is apparently the costume. Now, for those counties who know that they intend to apply, we are asking that you submit a letter of intent by November 18th, 2022. Now, submitting a letter of intent is not mandatory. If you don't submit one, you can still go ahead and submit a proposal in the end. And if you do submit them, they're not intended to be binding. So there's no penalty if you submit a letter of intent and then ultimately decide not to apply. But we do appreciate it if you feel like you're going to apply. It helps us out in the planning process to get an idea of how many proposals we can expect to deal with in the end. And probably the most important date I'm going to mention today, and I'm probably going to refer to it several times over the course of this morning, is the proposal due date of December 2nd, 2022 by 5 p.m. That is a hard stop proposal deadline, so I want to make sure everybody's keyed in on that date, and we'll mention that a few times. So with all of that introductory information handled, I thought I'd pause for a moment before we dive into the meat of this and give everybody an opportunity to ask any questions they may have of anything I've covered. And if you want to unmute yourself and speak up or raise your hand, we'll go ahead and let you do that, or you can put your questions in the chat. Like I said, do us a favor and write question in all caps at the beginning of your chat entry so we can kind of key in on those. I see one hand for someone named Observer. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, my name is Jessica. I'm from the County of San Luis Obispo, and I know you're calling from California, but I just want to make sure it's 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so I just wanted to clarify that real quick.
Yes, I actually did put that in a couple of other of the slides where I repeat that date, that it is the Pacific Standard Time we're using. So California time for 5 p.m. on the 2nd of December. Are there any other questions I can answer before we move on? Chad, do we have anything in the chat that I need to address?
No, it was just the same question that you just answered.
The same question. Okay. I bounced back and forth. Should I put PST on every single entry? And I guess maybe I should have. So thanks for bringing that up and clarifying that. We don't want anybody to get caught by a time difference. That would be unfortunate. So with that, I'll move on. We're going to start by discussing some key RFP components that you'll want to make yourself aware of. We'll talk about the California state strategy that was the one of the main drivers of the form the RFP ultimately took. We'll talk about those program purpose areas I mentioned in passing earlier and the related priority areas of need that your proposals will need to address. We'll talk some general project description items. We'll talk about funding. We'll talk about the evaluation process, and we'll talk about proposal disqualification in some detail. All right. So as part of the JAG program, the Bureau of Justice Assistance requires states to develop a multi-year strategic plan for the JAG program in that state. California's strategic plan was updated in 2022 and combined input from a couple of different sources. First, there was the program purpose areas that had been in place since 2013. And then we also had input from a year-long public input process that involved surveys and listening sessions and the like. Then we started that process in 2020 and incorporated the input from that into the JAG RFP. So California's multi-year state strategy provides equal emphasis on 5 program purpose areas that proposals will need to address. And just to say that again, applicants are restricted to proposals that address at least one of the 5 JAG program purpose areas, or PPAs as we'll call them for short. Additionally, for every PPA that a proposal addresses, you'll need to address one or more of the related priority areas of need that are associated with that PPA. And when we get into discussion the PPAs in detail, you'll see how that kind of plays out a little bit when we get into the examples. So the 5 program purpose areas, or PPAs, that are related to that are eligible for the JAG program here in California for this RFP are as follows. There's PPA 1, law enforcement programs, PPA 2, prosecution and court programs, PPA 3, prevention and education programs, PPA 5, drug treatment and enforcement programs, and then PPA 8, mental health programs and related law enforcement and correction programs. Now, I just want to make a side note here. These are the numbering systems that the Bureau of Justice Assistance uses. So that's why they skip from 3 to 5. And I do want to make clear that the numbering system doesn't indicate a preference. PPA 1 is not necessarily more important than PPA 5 or PPA 8, for example. As I mentioned before, California state strategy provides equal emphasis on these 5 program purpose areas. So I want to dive into a little more detail of each of the program purpose areas of the JAG program. PPA 1, law enforcement programs, has the following priority areas of need: violent crime reduction initiatives, drug enforcement, crisis intervention, mental health, suicide prevention, pre-arrest diversion, and mental health training for law enforcement. So just to use this one PPA as a simple example, if you decide in your proposal that you're going to address PPA 1 as part of your project, then you need to make sure that your proposal also addresses at least one of these related priority areas of need for law enforcement program PPA. All right, and you'll see that each of them are structured that way. PPA 2, prosecution and court programs, has priority needs for problem-solving courts such as mental health, veteran, drug, or reentry courts, gang and gun prosecution, violent crime prosecution and defense, innovations in indigent defense, and mental health liaisons. Moving on to PPA 3, which is prevention and education programs. This includes priority areas of need for school violence, at-promise youth, mental health education, job-specific training and certification programs. PPA 5, drug treatment and enforcement programs, includes priority areas of need for co-occurring treatment, for example, substance abuse and mental illness or other chronic health issues, community-based substance use residential treatment, and community-based substance use outpatient treatment. And then finally, PPA 8, mental health programs and related law enforcement and correction programs, includes the priority area of needs for crisis intervention teams, co-responder initiatives, residential inpatient behavioral treatment programs, and general mental health services. And if you're following along in the RFP, you'll notice that the RFP provides a expanded definition of co-responder initiatives to read as law enforcement and mental health clinicians working together to respond to calls for in-service or for service involving a person experiencing a behavioral health crisis. So the RFP adds a little definition to that. So those are the, excuse me, let me back up one. So those are the 5 program, policy or program purpose areas, excuse me for that, and their related priority and needs. And just to reinforce, your program, your proposal must address at least one of the PPAs. And then for the PPAs you select for your program, you need to make sure you're addressing at least one of the priority areas of needs. You can do more than one PPA if you wish. And within each PPA you select, you can do more than one priority area of need, but you need at least one. So moving past the PPAs, the multi-year state strategy for California has some other elements that you'll need to be aware of. First of all, it considers the needs of medium, small, and large counties. and bases funding on local flexibility on the needs of juvenile and adult criminal justice communities and input from a balanced array of stakeholders. Additionally, the strategy requires applicants to incorporate evidence-based principles and program for all funded projects and demonstrate a collaborative strategy based on community engagement model that involves multiple stakeholders and in the project and problems addressed. Finally, funded programs should emphasize reducing recidivism, racial and ethnic disparities and violence, incorporate trauma-informed care and be culturally informed, competent, and responsive, prioritize mental health needs and avoidance of system involvement within each PPA, and prioritize community-based organizations as service providers. And you'll see some of these elements of the state strategy come up as we talk about specific elements of the RFP and the rating proposal categories. It will be up to the applicant to demonstrate in their proposal how their project will align with California state strategies in these elements that I just mentioned. Okay, that's quite a bit to absorb, so I'll pause again to see if there are any questions I can address regarding these items. Pause first for any hand raising or if anybody wishes to unmute and ask a question. I see one, Jessica Yates, please go ahead.
Hi, me again. And so quick question, you might be covering it later on in the recording, but
Sure.
for each, the PPA 1 through 4 and then 8,
Yeah.
if you're in one county and say Behavioral Health wants to apply for PPA 2, can like the sheriff's office apply for PPA 8? Or so can you apply for more than one grant in the county from different departments?
And I will cover that later, but I'll just go ahead and actually it's the next slide, so you get this answer really quickly. But each county can only submit one application. So if you want those different elements that might be doing those different PPAs, it'll have to be in one proposal for that county. But as I said, a proposal could cover several different of those PPAs. Does that answer your question okay, at least preliminarily there, Jessica?
Oh, it does. That's perfect.
Like I said, you'll get another slide in just a moment, but let's check on any other questions before I dive into that level of detail. Chad, anything in the chat that I need to look at? Chad, you're muted there.
So there was one question. I don't know if you'd want to elaborate. I did put an answer in the chat, but they just asked, can the proposal be sent electronically or do you need a hard copy?
We will go into the details of how you submit your proposal towards the end of this morning. It's going to be through our submittable application portal. So you'll be getting some more detail about that shortly. And once we get to that point, it's one of the last things we'll talk about this morning. If I don't fully answer your question in that part of the proposal, please raise your hand or throw another question in the chat and we'll address it then. Anything else there, Chad?
Nope, that was it.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so getting to the detail of Jessica's question, we'll be covering some of this stuff as we move forward. All 58 counties are eligible to apply. So this grant is open to counties. The counties must be the applicants. Only one proposal may be submitted by each county. Now, each county that applies will be required to designate a lead public agency to coordinate all the grant activities. Now, the county can, the applying counties or the applicants can choose to fill the role of the lead public agency themselves as the county, or they may designate a department, agency, or office under the county's jurisdiction to serve as the lead public agency, or what we'll shortcut as LPA. So Jessica, that kind of more directly addresses your question. One county might put in an application, select one of those agencies to be the lead public agency, but again, they can certainly apply and address more than one PPA in that county's proposal. Moving on. The grant period, the timeline we need to be aware of is as follows. The grant agreement term runs from June 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2026. The grant service period within that is June 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2026. So that's the period in which you'll actually be doing grant operations or grant functions, and when actual grant items can be, or costs can be incurred. Now, the grant period or the grant term also includes an additional 6 months at the end. That's July 1, 2026 to December 30th, 2026. And that 6-month period at the very end of the grant term is solely for finalizing and submitting the financial audit and the local evaluation report that are required for the grant. And we'll talk a little bit about those later on down the road. We just want you to be aware that there's that 6-month process that is only for the audit and the local evaluation report, and only costs for those items will be able to be incurred during that time. Funding is subject to California receiving its grant award, and grantees will be required to adhere to grant agreements and agreement terms and conditions. Funding will be subject to following those grant terms and conditions as well. Okay, let's talk about the money a little bit. This RFP makes available competitively $47.3 million, right around $47.3 million. Now that funding is allocated across small, medium, and large size counties, and the counties are categorized according to the county population. Applicants may apply for any dollar amount up to and including the maximum grant amount identified in the small, medium, or large funding category. Now, we have a chart here to kind of help show you what we mean by all of that. As you can see here, the small counties, those with populations under 200,000, can apply for a maximum amount up to $660,000. And those small counties, excuse me, the small counties will compete amongst themselves for a total amount available of just about $9.5 million. Similarly, the medium counties may apply for the medium counties, which are those with a population from 200,001 up to 700,000, they may apply for $2,145,000 as a maximum grant amount for an individual applicant. And the medium counties will compete in that category for a grand total of about $14.2 million. Finally, the large counties, those with a population over 700,000, may apply for a maximum grant amount of $3,136,875. How's that for a nice round number? And the counties in that category will be competing for a grand total of about $23.7 million in that category. Just a caveat, as you can see here, because it has a disproportionately large population, Los Angeles County may apply for up to $6 million. And as you can see here, the applicants must prepare a budget that falls within their application threshold and covers the 3-year grant timeline, or the 42 months of the grant agreement period. Now, there is the option, if counties wish, to collaborate and partner up to put in a joint application for a multi-county partnership. Now, if you look at page 7 of the instruction packet, it has some instructions and examples that will show you, that will help you figure out what your threshold would be and what category of what funding category you would be competing in if you got together as a group and put in a joint application as a partnership. It also provides examples, for example, if you have a joint application that involves a combination of different size categories. And I forgot to mention earlier, if you wish to confirm which county or which category your county falls under, you can find the full list in Appendix B of the instruction packet, which is on page 29 of that packet. So if you're not exactly sure where you fall in that category, you can find it there. Now, an important note about multi-county partnerships, if you do want to put in a joint application under that method, a county may not apply alone and then turn around and be part of a multi-county partnership. Okay, you can be a part of a partnership, or you can apply alone as a county, but you can't do both. Just to make sure that's perfectly clear, so you don't get into a jam trying to do both of those items. In terms of funding requests, your budget must cover the entire 42-month grant period. You'll notice there is no match requirement. Now, proposals will be scored on the reasonableness of their budget, and we do strongly encourage that applicants only request the amount of funding needed to actually complete their program. I understand the temptation sometimes to just go ahead and ask for the maximum amount, but we do highly recommend that you just ask for the amount needed and no more. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Daniel Feist, who is going to provide some of her expertise regarding actually preparing your budget and using the budget template. Danny, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So we'll be covering today more of the technical aspect of the budget, how to download it, how to complete it, which sections you can fill in, and how to upload it. Next slide, Ian.
No, there it goes.
So Ian did mention earlier that we will be using the submittable portal to upload the applications. So when you are on the submittable portal, you will be told to navigate to our BSCC website. As you can see here in this red box, it has the link of where you will download the budget attachment that you will then be uploading back into submittable. To download the attachment, when it takes you to the BSCC website, you will see underneath step 2, JAG budget attachment. You'll need to click on that link and it will automatically download the document. So when you do open the document, you will see at the top of the Excel form, it will have enable editing. You'll need to enable the editing to enable our macros in the document. It will be safe that there's no virus on the document, but it will just ask you to enable the editing for that. Before you start creating your budget, it's highly recommended that you do go down on the bottom. You'll see different tabs. There is an instruction tab, and the instructions tab will tell you about what specific line items need to go into what section of your budget. For instance, if there is something that has an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more per unit, that is something that's considered equipment and a fixed asset. So that will go into that section. So just make sure that you do look over the instructions tab, and then there will also be a table on that tab as well at the very top, just showing you and reminding of the thresholds of small, medium, and large counties and how much grant funding can be requested. So now you'll go back to your project budget narrative tab. This tab is where you will fill out all of your budget narrative for your proposal, which will match the narrative that you proposed in your RFP. You will want to make sure you put your applicant county name. I know it sounds silly, but a lot of times this is one section that is forgotten. So it's at the very top of the page. Make sure that you put the county name. In all of the white cells, they will be unlocked. So you can put all your calculations and all your line items into these sections, and it will auto populate into the top budget table. So you'll see in the example that you can put all of your expenditures for salaries and benefits, put the title or of the position that you are going to be having working on the grant. Then you'll go and fill in if they are a FTE or hourly rate. And this calculation is important. So if they are somebody paid hourly, make sure that they're calculated hourly. And then if they are FTE percentage, then make sure that they are recorded as such. All of the totals, like I said, under grant funds will then populate into the budget table on the top. So you can see at the very bottom, there is an example. Staff position A is 1 FTE at $100,000 annually times 3 years. And then that amount populates into the top table. So each line item needs to have a narrative explaining how this calculation was formulated. So if you are, going to have staff position A, you need to give us an understanding of what that position is going to be doing and how they're going to function on the grant. And this is the same for any of the other budget categories. Any expenses, any, services, supplies need to have a description of what they're going to be used for the grant, as well as any NGOs that you subcontract with and what they are going to be doing on the grant, any staff positions that are going to be incurred and whatnot. And then at the very bottom of the budget, you'll see indirect costs. So indirect costs, if you do have a federally approved negotiated indirect cost rate, you can use that percentage. If not, you can also calculate it as 10% of total direct costs minus your equipment, and then plus up to the first $25,000 of each subcontract that you have, which is in the NGO section. It's cell F278 if you're referring to the template itself. However, just be sure that you do have the correct formula that you are utilizing for this section. We are going to, in the next couple days, update our template for this budget attachment, as it was we're trying to make it fully give you the full calculation, but it is your responsibility to make sure that the calculation for either your your negotiated rate or the 10% modified rate is correct. So after you filled out your budget, you'll go to the next tab. It's the third and final tab of the document, which is PPA allocations. And you'll notice that the bottom budget table is the budget table that will calculate, and it will populate itself from the tab before. And then you will need to make sure that the table at the top, the program purpose area funding table, utilizes the total amount of the requested grant funding. And you'll have to manually input that information. Once you have completed all of that, you will need to then save your document as an Excel document so you can upload it into Submittable. Right here at the bottom, you'll see the acceptable file types, and they're all Excel documents. So when you are going to, and we'll talk about this later, submit everything into Submittable, it needs to be in an Excel form. And this is the section showing where you will upload the document. You'll upload it where it says JAG budget attachment, and you'll choose the file. And again, it says the acceptable file types, which is where you will drop in the file that you have just created. And we can pause for any questions regarding any, technical assistance in relation to the budget attachment. Hearing none, Ian, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you very much, Danny. Appreciate
Thanks.
it. And also, if there are any questions about some of the stuff I covered before Danny took over, by all means, please let us know. Chad, do we have anything in the chat that we need to tackle there?
Nope, we are good.
All right, everybody's got the budget down pat. Fantastic. All right. Now, moving on, I'd like to cover some more general requirements or elements of the RFP. Apologies, I just want to make sure I didn't accidentally skip a slide there. For those that are addressing partnering with non-governmental organizations, you need to be aware that NGOs or non-governmental organizations have some specific criteria that need to be met if you're going to be partnering with them and if they're going to be receiving JAG grant funds. Now, NGOs, as we call them, can include a few different kinds of entities, like community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, nonprofit 501c3s, evaluators, grant management companies, or any other non-governmental agency or individual. And to partner with them and have them receive grant funding, they need to meet some of the or all of the following criteria, whether they're a subgrantee or a subcontractor. First, they must have been duly organized and in existence and in good standing for at least 6 months. They must be a nonprofit and recognized by the IRS as a 501c3 organization. They must be registered with the California Secretary of State's office if it's applicable for that kind of entity. They must have a valid employer identification number, or if they're a sole proprietorship, they need to have a valid tax identification number. They need to have a valid business license as applicable for the type of services they're providing. And likewise, they need to have any other state or local licenses or certifications that are necessary to provide the kind of services that you're going to have them provide for the grant. And finally, they must have a physical address within California. A agent for service of process with a California address does not meet this requirement. They actually have to have a physical address in California. And, excuse me, and also you'll see that you'll be submitting a form that we'll discuss later where you'll be attesting that the NGOs that you intend to partner with meet all of those requirements. So you'll have to do your due diligence to make sure those all apply. Another requirement for the JAG program that you'll want to be aware of is the requirement to form a local JAG steering committee. Now, the steering committee will be used to identify priorities in the community needs, identify which interventions or which PPAs you're going will be addressed to identify those local or to address those local needs. They'll develop local strategies to identify local needs and identify the projects and services that will be provided to address those needs. They will develop a written operational policy and procedure for that steering committee, and they'll provide ongoing oversight of the project. I would encourage everyone to please take a close look at pages 10 and 11 of the instruction packet. It has some additional information about the required composition of your local steering committee and their responsibilities. And you'll also be submitting as Appendix E to your proposal a roster of the local steering committee that you put together. The proposal also requires the submission of letters of agreement or operational agreements as applicable to your project. Now, in determining which you need, basically, a letter of agreement is a less formal document that would involve a partnership where services are being provided in kind and no actual funding is being exchanged. For example, you might be partnering with another organization for referrals or something along those lines, but no one's exchanging any grant funds in relation to that. That would be a simple letter of agreement. If you have a partnership in which funding will be exchanged for services, you'll require a more formal operational agreement like an MOU, memorandum of understanding, or a contract, something along those lines. Now, you can refer to Appendix F and G for some samples of operational agreements and letters of agreement, and page 11 of the instruction packet has some more details. Please note that while you do need to submit your intended letters of agreement and operational agreement with your proposal, it is okay to get your signatures, signed versions submitted after the proposal due date. We understand sometimes you don't want to enter into the formal agreement until you know whether or not you're going to get funded. Now, one of the other requirements that I previously mentioned in California's state strategy is that programs use evidence-based principles and programs in their project. Now, when you're evaluating your intended proposal to see if it meets this requirement, there's some key questions that you can ask yourself, and the answers will give you some guidance there. First of all, you want to ask, is there some kind of evidence or data to suggest that the intervention or strategy that you intend to use will work, that will produce the result that you're hoping to get out of your project? So we're not looking for here. You don't want to be relying on anecdotal stories. I heard about this program at this other place and I think it would be great, but is there some kind of evaluation, study, or some other formal look at what the kind of strategy you're intending to employ to show that it will actually have a positive outcome or benefit. Now, once you select a strategy or intervention, will you be able to demonstrate that you are carrying it out as intended? Obviously, if you look at a proposal or a study or an evaluation that indicates that a certain kind of strategy is likely to be successful, if you then implement that strategy significantly differently than was studied, then you can't reliably expect the same results that were attained in the programs that were studied. And then finally, do you have a plan to collect evidence or data that will allow an evaluation of your outcomes to determine whether the intervention or strategy worked? Now, the key takeaway in determining evidence-based practices is basically, can you show that you are using data and evidence to drive your project design and your decision-making in implementing that program? That's the easy summation version of those elements. Now, speaking of evaluation requirements, this grant does require that applicants set aside at least 5% of the total grant award for data collection and evaluation efforts. On that, you'll actually see on the budget template that Danny was looking at or showing you earlier, there is an area for you to enter an allocation and a dollar amount for data collection and evaluation efforts, and you want to make sure that at least 5% of your total grant award is being set aside for those amounts. And those data collection evaluation efforts include the submission of a local evaluation plan that'll be due no later than December 31st of 2023, and a local evaluation report, which will be due no later than December 31st, 2026. And we'll provide some more detail about the local evaluation plan and local evaluation report to those grantees that are ultimately funded when we do the grantee orientation. Okay, before I go on with some more general requirements, do we have any questions about anything I've covered so far in this segment? I am not seeing any hands raised. Am I missing anybody? All right, Chad, do we have anything in the chat?
Yeah, we do have one question in the chat.
Okay.
Is time spent on the steering committee by a member of the steering committee eligible for the grant budget if the steering committee member is a full-time county employee?
That's an excellent question. Ricardo, can I ask you to weigh in on that and confirm my understanding?
Yeah, sure, happy to. No, so I guess no is the succinct and short answer. I didn't mean it as abruptly as it came up. My apologies, but no in the sense that the grant hasn't been formally executed, and so if there's time that's being implemented now to start the project, while that's certainly great, it's not something that we would be billing the project for because there's not a formal grant agreement. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you, and I apologize. I caught you off guard, so that explains the abruptness. All right, I see a couple of other hands raised. Martin Schwartz, go ahead with your question, please.
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation, and forgive me if my question's ignorant, but this is our first time looking into the grant itself, so I'm trying to figure out procedurally how things are going to work. I'm curious what the expectations of the steering committee are. You know, typically our local steering committees, you know, our local CCP, our local MHSA steering committee, you know, they concern themselves with identifying how funds are going to be spent, right? But if a specific program is suggested and a grant awarded pursuant to that proposal, that's already set, right? So what is the steering committee concerning itself with?
Well, the steering committee starts in the beginning by providing input on the design of the program, essentially in terms of what PPAs the county is going to address and the priority areas of need, things along those lines. That's where the initial part of the steering committee will address. And I'll just pop back to the slide really quickly. I apologize anybody if I'm giving anybody vertigo, but this slide here can provide some direction, and you'll see page 10 and 11 add some additional information. These are the kinds of things that we want that we need the steering committee to kind of weigh in on. And then once the proposal is underway, ongoing oversight would be the ongoing involvement of that local steering committee's responsibility. Does that answer your question okay?
It does. I'll probably have more follow-up questions once this actually gets going, but it does. Thank you very much.
Okay. And Jessica Yates, I see you've got a question as well. What can I answer?
Quick question regarding the 5% for the data collection.
Yes.
Certain grants require that to be an outside agency that comes in and does that evaluation. Is that 5%, can that be an analyst within the county, or does it have to be outside? Because I know different grants have different regulations about that.
We encourage outside evaluators. However, this grant does not specifically require outside evaluators. So an internal individual would be fine. And does that answer your question okay, Jessica?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, and I saw another question, but it disappeared. Am I missing anybody else?
There is one more question in the chat
Okay.
is there a list of evidence-based programs for all PPA areas?
There's not a specific list that's organized by PPA. However, on our BSEC website, I believe there's a few links. The general grants program has some links. It really depends on what kind of project you're doing, and you'll need to research general information on different evidence-based. What constitutes evidence-based principles depends a lot on what kind of program you're putting together. So we don't have one place where all of that is easily accessible. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. I apologize if
There is one more, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Is there, it's for the budget, but is there a cap on grant-funded positions benefits as a percentage of salary? So is there a cap on the fringe benefit percentage?
No, there's not a specific formulaic cap on benefits versus salaries or anything along those lines. The only point I would bring up there that I mentioned earlier is budgets will be scored on the reasonableness of the budget. That's the only caveat I can add to that. Any other questions that I need to address before moving on to some other requirements? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and continue forward. If I can get my PowerPoint back up and running here. Okay, a couple of other general requirements. As will probably surprise no one, those applicants that are approved for funding will be required to enter into a grant agreement with the BSEC and of course comply with all the terms and conditions of that grant agreement. And if you look at the proposal packet, Appendix I provides you a sample grant agreement that will give you a solid idea of what that contract will ultimately look like. I would like to highlight for you that the grant agreement includes federal award conditions that are passed down by the BJA for each of the fiscal years for which JAG funding is being used in this grant. So you'll see a separate set of federal award conditions specific to fiscal year 2020, 2021, and 2022, because those are the funding years that are being bundled for this RFP solicitation. I will point out, if you look at the sample agreement that we have right now, it erroneously includes 2019 conditions. However, those won't apply to the final contracts because we're not using 2019 funds for this RFP. Another requirement that comes into play is the passing and submitting to BSEC of a governing board resolution. Now, you do not necessarily have to provide a governing board resolution at the time of proposal. However, please understand that we will not be able to issue any grant payments until we have a finalized governing board resolution in hand here at the BSEC. So again, you won't necessarily need to provide that in the proposal, but we'll need that later on before we can actually start sending money your way. And there is a sample resolution in the proposal packet. You don't have to necessarily use our template. You can use whatever is the appropriate template for your agency and county. I kind of mentioned in passing earlier that there is also an audit requirement at the end of this grant period. That's one of those things that falls into that 6-month period towards the end of the grant agreement term. Now, you may use to meet this requirement either your annual city county single audit, or you may do a specific grant specific audit and meet that requirement. Totally your choice. Got some additional information there on page 15 for you if needed. Now, there's an additional requirement that applicants certify that they have not, that the applicant has not been debarred by any governmental entity from applying for or receiving federal, state, or local funding, that the applicant has not been convicted of fraud, theft, or embezzlement. And you will also be required to, the certification form you'll be completing on that note also requires that you hold any of your subgrantees or subcontractors to the same requirements. If they're going to be receiving grant funds, you will be responsible for making sure that they meet those requirements. And you can find that spelled out in more detail on pages 15 and 17. And the form that you'll be filling out and submitting to BSCC, making that certification, is Appendix K on the proposal application. You'll be completing that and uploading that into the submittable form. Okay, so I'll move on to talk a little bit about the RFP process before I hand things over to Tia to talk about the rating process. When you actually submit in the submittable portal your application, you'll receive an email confirming that that proposal has been submitted. Now, BSCC will be convening a scoring panel that will read and rate the proposals and develop funding recommendations to forward to the actual BSCC board. We plan to have a list of the scoring panel members posted on our BSCC website no later than December of this year. Now, unless a proposal is disqualified, all the proposals that are not disqualified will advance to the scoring panel. The scoring panel will rate and read and rate those proposals, and then develop funding recommendations. Those funding recommendations will then go to the board for action on in April of 2023. Okay, so I'm imagining that some ears perked up when I mentioned proposals being disqualified, because of course no one wants to get their proposal disqualified. So I'm going to dive into some detail on what will actually get a proposal disqualified. And I encourage everyone, I'm going to go over it here, but please take a look at page 18 carefully to see all of the criteria that will result in automatic disqualification. The first one, and I told you I referenced this date a few times, the proposal will be disqualified if the electronic proposal packet is not received in the submittable application portal by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. See, I got you, Jessica, on December 2nd, 2022. So I want to hit that date one more time, December 2nd, 2022 by 5 p.m. PST. We must have that electronic proposal in, or it will not move forward. Also, if the applicant does not meet the eligibility criteria, we talked about that a little bit earlier. If the proposal does not address required program purpose areas as listed in the RFP, in which we discussed earlier. If the funding amount exceeds, the funding request exceeds the applicable allowable amount for your category, large, medium, and small, or as a multi-county partnership. If your funding request is more than that allowable amount, the proposal will be disqualified. And then on the budget attachment, if it's incomplete, the total amount included in the budget doesn't match the amount requested elsewhere in the application, that will result in disqualification. What I'm talking about here is there are several different there's a couple different places in the application process and submittable and on the budget template where you will enter your dollar request amount, your grand total. And that needs to match. If we get $1 amount on the application and a different dollar amount on the budget attachment, that will result in automatic disqualification. Oh, did I miss oh, sorry. Additional criteria that will result in automatic disqualification. If the proposal packet does not include the required, the following sections, the proposal narrative, all of the required attachments, and we'll go over the required attachments in detail in a bit here, and the budget attachment is spreadsheet in Excel. We need all of those. And if any of the attachments that you're required to download or upload into the submittal portal are, if they are illegible or will not open or otherwise corrupted, that will result in automatic disqualification. So just to be on the same page of what we mean by automatic disqualification, if a proposal is disqualified for one of these criteria, that means that it will not move forward to the scoring panel. That scoring panel will not review it. They won't even see it. And then it will not, and therefore it will not be considered for funding. Understood. Other than one of these criteria, it may be the very best proposal that's ever been written in the history of grant making, but we will not be able to move it forward for funding consideration. Just want to highlight that because that's a critical element that we want everybody to be aware of. And with that, I hope that wasn't doom and gloom. I hate to end that part on a dark note, but I kind of got to be transparent. With that, I will open the floor again to any questions about anything we've covered. And we'll start with hands or unmuting, and then we'll go to chat. So anyone have a question that we can address? I stunned the room with disqualification. No one's got any questions. Okay. Chad, do we have anything in the chat? I'm seeing a signal.
Nothing in the chat.
Oh, okay. I really did stun everybody. Yikes. I did not mean to sound ominous there, so I apologize if that's how I came off. All right. So with that in hand, I'm going to turn the floor over to our research specialist, Tia, and she's going to talk a little bit about the rating factors and proposal rating process. Tia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, y'all. That was a lot of information. So I invite you all to take a couple of deep breaths, and I assure you that everything will be okay. And if you need to stretch or something, I know we've been sitting for about an hour. I invite you to do that as well. Just a quick stretch, and I will get into my presentation. So thank you again, Ian. My name is Tia Hairston. I am the research data specialist assigned to this grant. And so today we'll discuss the proposal evaluation system components of this particular grant RFP. And this information is just for you to know what you will be asked to respond to throughout your proposals, right? And so we refer to what we ask applicants to provide and how it will be used as the proposal evaluation system. So the goal of today is to help you understand exactly what is expected of you as the applicants, and hopefully, it will be very clear to you by the end, or maybe not, but that's what we're here for. We're here to answer questions. But it's important that you are able to clearly articulate in your application the responses for what we are asking for. And so here, Ian kind of already went through this. I think this is more of a bulleted explanation of the RFP process. So just going over it again, you will first submit your proposal. Then the technical compliance review will be applied. So that's exactly what Ian was just referring to in terms of the disqualifications, those things that would get flagged. And then the proposals will be forwarded to the scoring panel. They will read and score the proposals. They will make final recommendations after they've read and rated them. And then the scoring panel recommendations will go to the board applicants, will go to the board, and applicants will be notified of the final results. And the next slide, please. Thank you. So this time, the BSCC has convened a JAG executive steering committee well, excuse me, in 2018, we had a executive steering committee, also known as the ESC. But for this particular RFP, we have a scoring panel. So this is a little bit different. And the responsibility of this scoring panel will be, again, to rate the proposals using transparent and fair measurement principles developed by the ESC, and then make the funding recommendations to the board. Thank you. So here's the fun stuff. This is the proposal evaluation system table that we use for JAG. And this is shown essentially just to give you context as to how the components of the evaluation system work together and are used to calculate the final proposal scores. These components these are components that are determined by the ESC. And so they include the rating factors, the weights, referred to a percent of total value in this table. So we'll get into all of this. Don't worry about it. But also the total possible score for a proposal and a minimum scoring threshold. So raters will score an applicant's response in each of these rating factors on a scale from 0 to 5, which you will see in the next slide as well. The points allocated to each rating factor are weighted according to the percent of total value, okay, to arrive at the weighted rating factor score as seen on this slide. And again, we'll see it in the next slides. So the weighted rating factor scores are summed to calculate the overall score for each sub-proposal. The maximum total is 200. And so this is all here on your screen. For this grant, there's a minimum scoring threshold that an applicant must achieve to be considered for funding. And in this case, it's 60% or 120 points out of the 200 that must be earned. And once each applicant's proposal score is determined, a ranked list is created for funding purposes. A separate ranked list will be created for the awards. And then we'll go into more detail in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. So here are the factors that each application will be rated on: project need, project description, collaboration, capability and qualifications, project evaluation and monitoring, and project budget. And we'll discuss these in more detail as well. Next slide, please. Okay, isn't this pretty? So to give you an idea of what the rating scale will look like, this is our standard scale. It's used across all of our grants. And this scoring panel that will convene for this particular grant will use this same rating scale to evaluate each proposal's responses to each rating factor. So to describe what you're looking at here, this is a 6-point scale or scoring rubric. And beneath each point value and its label is a description provided to help further define each scale point, right? So in other words, does it fail to address? What does it fail to address? What is it very inadequate? Is it unsatisfactory? Those are the kind of things that we're looking at in terms of the factors. So each of these anchors includes key terms that are in bold font to further distinguish the scale points from one another. See, I'm looking at both screens. I'm making sure that what I'm telling you is shown on the screen. Okay, so raters will translate each evaluation or their own evaluations of the strengths and the weaknesses of an applicant's responses to a rating factor into a point value using this 6-point rating scale. The points allocated to each rating factor are weighted according to the percent of total value to arrive at the weighted rating factor score. And the weighted rating factor scores are summed to calculate the overall score again, which is 200. So I want to stop just for a second, see if there are any questions coming in, Chad, or
None in the chat as of yet.
perfect. I'll keep going till somebody says anything. All right, next slide, please. So again, we are rating 6 different areas: project need, project description, collaboration, capability and qualifications, project evaluation and monitoring, and then the project budget. And you can see these beginning on page 19 of the RFP. So I will briefly touch on these rating factors just because this is all preliminary, right? We're not sure who's going to actually apply. If you do actually apply, these things will be explained to you in more detail at a later time. So we'll kind of just briefly breeze through it. Let's review these rating factors. They start on page 22 if you do have the RFP with you or available to you and open. And we encourage you to read these in its entirety. The responses that you provide to these rating factors and their criteria are what the scoring panel will read and rate. So it's really important that you have a good understanding of what we're asking for. So for the first one, we have the project need. And you will, or your organizations will describe the needs to be addressed, including how those needs are related to one or more of the program purpose areas that Ian described earlier. You'll have to identify service gaps that contribute to the need, describe current racial and ethnic disparities, violence and or recidivism, if applicable, which demonstrate the need for the proposed project. It is required to offer some type of relevant local qualitative or quantitative data with endnote citations in support of the need. So those citations are just that evidence-based information, right? So who are you getting this information from, or where is it coming from? And then demonstrate a compelling justification for the grant funds. Next slide, please. Thank you. For the second area, or rating factor, it's project description. Here you will describe the proposed project, the interventions that you plan to use, the project goals, measurable objectives, and the potential impact, the proposed services and interventions, how the proposed project will address the project need from rating factor 1, the intent of the JAG program and the identified program purpose areas, how the project will address the racial and ethnic disparities, violence and or recidivism identified in the project need, how the proposed project will, if applicable, incorporate trauma-informed care and be culturally informed, competent, and responsive. How the proposed project will, again, if applicable, prioritize mental health needs and the avoidance of system involvement. And then a complete project work plan, which you will see at the end of this, or excuse me, at the end of my presentation, I will show you what that looks like. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then this is still rating factor 2, they're kind of long, so bear with me. But for project participants, you will describe the target population, the plan for identifying, accessing, selecting, and serving individuals from the target population, plans to overcome any inability to access and or serve those individuals. You will include a strategy or strategies for maintaining sustained engagement, and then the plan for determining which services a particular participant will receive. For example, a risk and needs assessment. Those are really useful. You will also describe the relevant evidence, findings, or research to support the selection of the proposed services and interventions. So these descriptions would include whether the intervention is evidence-based, innovative, or promising. Again, refer back to those slides that Ian shared with us. How the outcomes achieved elsewhere support using the proposed practices in the applicant's jurisdiction to achieve the goals and objectives. And then how the intervention is appropriate for the proposed target population, and steps taken to ensure that the support factors required or necessary for the intervention can be mobilized in a local setting. Next slide, please. So rating factor number 3, collaboration. You will provide a roster for the local JAG steering committee to include names, titles, and organizational affiliations. Describe the process used to identify, recruit, and engage steering committee members, and then demonstrate that there is full and balanced representation from both traditional and non-traditional stakeholder groups. We are still on rating 3, or rating factor 3. So you'll describe how full participation and voting rights were ensured for all members throughout the process. Describe the process used to identify the problem areas and develop the project need. Describe the process used to establish and maintain collaboration as it relates to supporting the proposed project, and then describe the steering committee's ongoing role throughout the project. How are we doing so far? Doing good?
I don't see any hands at this point.
I
Perfect.
do have one question in the chat, just a kind of general though. Does each member of the committee score each proposal, or are proposals split up among the committee members for review and scoring?
Ricardo, with the difference in with the change from the ESC to the scoring panel, can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but I'm going to say for right now, the answer is TBD, unfortunately. Normally we like to have a really, I would say, kind of firm answer, but a lot of what we've found, I think, in our most recent process is the number of applications we receive will certainly drive our commitment to either have all of the members read all the proposals, or for us to use a scoring panel that is split up. So for example, if we were to receive, let's say hypothetically 58 submissions, one from each county, we would certainly be using more of a panel process whereby there's a split, and then we have what we call some control proposals that everyone would read, versus if we were to receive a much smaller number, it might be that each panelist would read all the proposals. So it's a bit of a TBD right now. But it's really going to be driven by the number of submissions that are received.
Thank you. I saw looks like there's one more question.
Yep. Yeah, so it looks like it's kind of a program specific one, but I'll go ahead and ask it. We are proposing to continue our 2019 to 2022 JAG funded program. Are there any special requirements to include evaluation data from our program? For example, how successful we were in achieving the 2019 to 2022 program goals?
Ian, I'm wondering if this one is for you.
Yeah, I would say there's no specific requirement that you report your previous project's outcomes. But of course, as we discussed when we were talking about evidence-based principles, if that's a source of data you might use to indicate that there is data supporting your approach, that could be a source of data for you to use, but it's not a requirement.
Thank you kindly. Okay, so moving into rating factor 4, capability and qualifications. Here you would describe your ability to conduct the proposed project, list the project partners that will provide services, including a description of the services to be provided, the partner's credentials, involved personnel, justification for choice, and the value the partners add to the proposed project. Describe applicants' partners' experience and capability to conduct the project. Describe the staff allocations and assignments for the separate project components. Describe the experience and qualifications of key project staff to provide and manage services, the management structure and decision-making process for the project, and then describe the readiness for development and implementation of the proposed project. So section 5, project evaluation and monitoring. Here is where you would describe the plan to determine the staff and or entity that will conduct the project evaluation. I can't remember who asked the question earlier, but this may be for you. And how monitoring activities will be incorporated in the various phases of the project. For example, the startup, the implementation, the service delivery period, etc. You would identify the process and outcome indicators that are quantifiable and in line with the intent of the proposal and the objectives listed in the project work plan. And then describe the preliminary plan for how to collect and evaluate baseline and outcome data related to the process and outcome indicators identified in this one above. And you would describe a plan for entering into data sharing agreements if that's necessary. It may not be necessary for what you're doing. And this is the really fun one, the budget. So you would provide a complete and detailed budget information in each section of the budget attachment. This would include expenses that are appropriate for the project's goals and planned activities, an explanation justifying each expense tied to the services offered and the population served, and describe within each budget section how the expenditures are being applied to the benefit of the project participants. And here is one of the pieces of the application that will help you address all of those other pieces that I just described. This is the project work plan. This identifies measurable goals and objectives, activities and services, and responsible parties, and a timeline. So it gives you kind of a template of where to fill in all of these things. The completed project work plan should identify the project's top goals and objectives, how the top goals will be achieved in terms of the activities, the staff and partners, the start and end dates, things like that, and provide goals and objectives and measures with a clear relationship to the need and the intent of the program. So applicants must use this project work plan that you see here. This is not included in the, there's a character limit. This is not included in that character limit. So this is, I think this is going to be a separate attachment.
That's correct. It's a different attachment from the submittable portion.
Yep, and that concludes my piece of this presentation. Any other questions for me? And again, I know we moved through that rather quickly, but that's just to give you a pretty basic overview and understanding of what is going to be asked of you once you do apply. If you have any other questions or need technical assistance, I believe myself and Chad, probably Danielle, definitely Ian will be available to answer questions, but this is just a broad overview of what to expect once you do apply.
All right. Thank you very much, Tia, and for feeling that's really important to keep those proposal rating factors in mind, because that's exactly what the scoring panel is going to be look at when they read your proposal. So you want to keep those close to hand as you develop your proposal. All right. Before I move on, are there any questions that about anything Tia covered or anything that I covered before Tia took over?
I see
Sure.
one, it's asking about, there's a notice that gives character count that averages 15 pages. Is the 15 page the limit or the character count? So because you're going to be submitting this to a online platform, it's going to be a character count. It will not let you submit after a certain amount of characters. The 15 pages is just an estimate. If you were doing this on a Word document, it would be about 15 pages long, or excuse me, the limit would be about 15 pages.
Yeah, and I actually have a slide that goes into a little more detail on that, so you'll see that, whoever was asking that question. But it's the character limit in submittable for your narrative and some of the other where you're actually typing out paragraphs, and I'll show that to you shortly. Anything else we can cover?
There is one more. Can a county apply for the funding and then subcontract with a for-profit firm to provide the services?
The NGO portion, if you recall, one of the requirements in the NGO application eligibility portion indicated that they needed to be a nonprofit 501c3. So if they're providing the services, it needs to meet that requirement. Anything else I need to cover on that element or anything else? Seeing none, I will open up for a final round of questions for anything we've covered. So if questions are still kind of formulating in people's minds, there will be a couple more opportunities. So we'll get back to you. So let's talk a little bit about the actual submission process once you go on that submittable online application portal. So I told you, I promised you I'd say this over and over again. So here I am again, reminding everybody, submissions are due December 2nd, 2022 by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Now, the application must be, and all the required attachments must be submitted using our BSCC submittable online application portal. Please do not email us your application, send it by FedEx, UPS, Messenger Pigeon, or any other chosen means of getting stuff to us. It's got to come through the submittable online application portal. And you can get to that and the various materials that you need to download to prep your proposal on the BSCC's website, where you can find the JAG homepage. And obviously the easy way to do that is to follow this link once we post this PowerPoint, but you can navigate to it on our regular our regular website. You can get there. It's under the grants division. And if you do experience any challenges while you're trying to submit your JAG application or its attachments, please go ahead and email us. Again, same email I provided earlier, jag2022@bscc.ca.gov. And again, we'll try to tackle your question as quickly as we can. So this is how we go about actually applying. Again, if you go to the BSCC webpage on the JAG homepage, you'll see a link that takes you to the submittable application portal. You'll select the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program and click Apply to get started on the process. Unless you wish to apply for one of the other ones, and then that's not what this Bidders Conference is about. We're going to focus on JAG. Now, once you click that Apply button, you're going to be asked to either create a free submittable account, or if you already have an account that you created prior for some other process, go ahead and log into your existing account. It takes just a couple of moments to set that up and you'll be off to the races to actually submit your application on submittable. Now, I will give everyone kind of a assurance here. I am not the most technically savvy person on the planet by far and away. And I got to do a test run of this and it was pretty intuitive. I was able to make my way through the system pretty easily. So I think you'll be happy with the process. But again, please email us on that email if you run into any concerns or problems. Now, as you're moving through the application form, you will notice that some of the fields are identified with an asterisk to indicate that it's a mandatory field. The submittable system will not let you push apply, will not let you make that final submission unless all of these mandatory fields are completed. So if you're sitting at the end there desperately trying to click apply, roll back and see if you've got any of the asterisk fields not submitted. That may be what's holding up your process. It won't let you go any farther. Somebody mentioned character limits earlier, so this will hopefully answer that question a little more depth. For several of the places in the proposal, specifically the narrative section, the proposal summary, and there's also a section to enter a bibliography. For those sections, there's a established character limit, and they give you in the text a little text like Tia was talking about what that roughly equates to in if you were writing this on Microsoft Word. Now, when you go to type in, or if you're cutting and pasting into these fields, if you exceed the character limit, the character counter in the lower right-hand corner will turn red, and some text will pop up indicating that you've exceeded the character limit, and you need to trim your narrative or trim your proposal summary, whichever you're filling out. Please note that if you cut and paste or type past that character limit and don't correct that, and then go ahead and save and finalize your proposal, it will only forward the text up to the character limit. So if you've got way more text in there, once you hit submit and it goes into the system, it doesn't save anything beyond that character limit, and we'll see, a sentence cut off in the middle or wherever that character limit was reached. We won't see anything beyond that, just so you're aware of that. There are also sections to upload the various attachments. I think Danny and Tia kind of showed you some of these earlier. It's pretty straightforward. You choose your file, you've saved that document to your desktop or wherever in your system you want to save it. You click choose file, you go find it, and you upload it into submittable. And you'll notice between each of these areas, it actually indicates, it may be a little hard to see on the small screen, but it actually indicates what type of files or what file formats are acceptable for that submission. Most of them accept like doc and PDF, but you'll notice the JAG budget attachment requires it to be into one of the spreadsheet, Excel, CV, and so on. It has to be in one of those formats. It won't let you submit otherwise. Now, speaking of uploading attachments, once again, when you first start, when you go to the JAG homepage on our website, you'll notice there's a list of all the appendix that you need to submit. You'll see the budget attachment. I spoke earlier about your criteria for non-governmental organizations that you'll need to fill out, the project work plan, your steering committee roster, letters of agreement. And I just want to highlight, if everyone noticed when Tia was going through the proposal rating process, one of the requirements there was to have letters of agreement from your local steering committee members. So that's among the letters of agreement you'll be submitting. Operational agreements as they apply, a sample governing board resolution. You can download our sample, or again, feel free to use your own local governing board resolution. Again, that's not required at the time of proposal, but we'll need to have that in hand, the finalized resolution, before we can start issuing payments. And then also required at the time of proposal, I mentioned earlier that certification of compliance regarding debarment, fraud, theft, and embezzlement. And you can find all of those forms on the JAG webpage. Go ahead and download them, save them locally, however works for you. And then once you've completed and filled those out, you'll re-upload them up into the submittable platform, and that'll be included in your proposal once that's done. Now, once you've completed the application process, you've filled everything out, you've done all your mandatory asterisk marked fields, you've uploaded all your documents, all your required attachments, and you're all ready to go, and you've got the proposal exactly how you want us to receive it, you're ready to click apply at the bottom of the document. Now, I will note, I should have mentioned this earlier, if you're partway through the proposal process and then you close it and come back, it'll save your work that far. So you know, if you've got to go back and work on something else, it should save all that material for you. But in any case, once you're all ready to apply, you'll click apply at the bottom here, and it'll formally submit your proposal. And as I mentioned earlier, you'll get an email from the submittable system saying that we received your proposal. As I mentioned, the submission process must be completed by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on December 2nd, 2022. The system will not allow submissions after 5 p.m. Once 5 p.m. rolls around, the system actually locks it and that apply button will no longer function. And please understand, even if you're halfway through your proposal and 5 o'clock comes around, it will not let you submit. You must complete your proposal, get everything in, and push apply by 5 p.m. If you're partway through and 5 p.m. rolls around, it will lock you out. So obviously, I strongly encourage everybody kind of have everything ready to go and squared away well in advance of that 5 p.m. deadline on December 2nd. You don't want to run into a jam of some sort and then 5 p.m. comes along and the apply button locks out and you're not able to submit. Please understand, like I mentioned, you can email us if you run into challenges, but obviously if we get 20 emails at 4:55 on December 2nd, we can only address them as quickly as we can address them. And if the time passes, the time passes. So I recommend everybody be ready to go and ready to submit well in advance of that deadline. So you've built some contingency time into your planning process. All right, with that, before I kind of sum up and review some of the stuff we've touched on, can I answer any questions either about the submittable platform and the actual submission process, or at this point, anything that we've covered today that you'd like to clarify or cover? The floor is open for questions. I'm not seeing any hands. Do we have anything on the chat, Chad?
Yep, there are a couple in the chat. First one is, if a county has a prior account, but under a former employee or prior user, do we need to use the former account, or can a new one be established for a new user under the same county to submit the application?
My understanding of the system is they are tagged by email, so I would just go ahead and create a fresh new account. Ricardo, is that your understanding as well? Am I remembering that correctly?
That sounds accurate. And
okay.
You know, our larger concern obviously is just the ability to receive the application. So it's certainly up to you locally. If it's accessing that prior account makes the most sense, or if it's a brand new account, we just need to be able to receive it, obviously.
Right.
And then the second question is, if a county is submitting a proposal with multiple departments or agencies, do the program purpose areas need to be connected, or can they be different programs addressing different areas of need within the county?
As long as your proposal overall addresses at least one program purpose area and at least one of the priority areas that fall into whichever PPAs you're addressing, how you structure that is entirely up to you. So if you've got one PPA and one, if I'm understanding the question correctly, if one PPA is being covered by one agency and another PPA is being covered by another agency, your structure in that is up to you, as long as you're addressing at least one of the PPAs and the associated areas of need within that PPA. So I hope that answers the question.
And can I just add just a little bit to that too?
Please.
So I would say, just in addition to you know, what Ian has said, just, you know, again, remember that, you know, because this is a competitive process, if you're planning on, let's say, a collaborative approach that includes a lot of different elements, it should still read in a manner that a scoring panel would understand the flow of your proposal as well. So obviously, you know, there's lots of benefits with the coordination that goes with working with multiple departments or agencies, but just, you know, I would say still make an effort. And again, that's why some time was allocated to review the rating factors, just to make sure that the final product is something that's cohesive, that the scoring panel could review and doesn't appear disjointed as it pertains to the rating factors.
Thank you for that, Ricardo. And also, I just remind everybody, regardless, there is also the requirement that the applicant designate a lead public agency to coordinate the grant as a whole, whether that's the county or one of the agencies under the county's jurisdiction.
Right, and then a couple more. The next one is, can a police department apply on their own, or does it have to go through the sheriff's department?
The applicant must be the county, and then the county may designate lead public agencies. So short answer, no, a police department would not be able to submit its own solo application.
And then next one is, in the submission portal, if work is saved but prior to the final submit, will the user be able to make edits up until submission?
Yes. Yes, if you're filling things out and you stop and go away and you haven't pushed submit yet, you can go back in and go back and change elements of your proposal.
That looks like everything in the chat.
Okay, I'll just give just want to give a few more moments because I know we've thrown a lot of information at everybody. And I don't want to, if someone's formulating a question or thinking about what they want to ask, I want to give a little extra time here before we sum up and close out for the morning. I'll go ahead and move to the next slide, but if there's a question, please let us know. Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and just do a quick summary of some key takeaways. Obviously, I can't cover again everything we've touched, but I do want to address some key items. Number one, please make sure that your proposal must address at least one of the PPAs, the program purpose areas. And for each PPA that you address, you must address at least one of the corresponding priority areas of needs for that PPA. Only one request for the funding is needed. You do not need to, if you have multiple PPAs, you do not need to submit multiple proposals. Each county may only submit one proposal. The funding amounts on the application and the budget must be the same. Please make sure you make those match up exactly. And then please review carefully the disqualification information on page 18 to make sure that that does not stymie an otherwise great proposal. And then finally, I promised you I'd say it a bunch of times, you must apply prior to 5 p.m. on the budget on the submittable application portal by December 2nd, 2022. Do we have a question, or just want to give everybody a moment? Okay, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but just to follow up in the end, if you have any questions moving forward, we'll be accepting questions up to November 21st. If you have any questions, please send them to the JAG 2022 bsccca.gov email. And of course, if you have challenge with budget submittal or with the submittable system or anything like that, please feel free to email us there. I've also got my my direct email there if you want to contact me directly. I do suggest that you at the very least CC that JAG 2022 inbox, just in case I am out of the office or otherwise unavoidable or unavailable. Making sure you CC that inbox will make sure someone will get to you if it's before I'm back. So with that, if there are no final questions, I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. I know we threw a lot of information at you, so thanks for sitting through all that. I hope you found it all useful, and we wish all of you the very best of luck. With that, we'll go ahead and close out for the day. Thank you and enjoy your Halloween. Goodbye all. Go ahead and